Hi, I'm Julie. I work at PayFit, where I'm a product operations lead.
My guest today is Julie Robles. Julie is leading the Product Ops team at PayFit, and her role is to maximize efficiency and impact of the product and tech teams. She has over 13 years of experience in product and program management for both startups and large corporations, exploring ecosystems in Europe, Middle East, and Asia. She is also a product and OKRs mentor for Google for Startups and ADPList. I've split my conversation with Julie into 2 episodes because there were lots of topics to discuss. In this first episode, we talk about her background and journey into product ops and the relationship between product managers and product ops, how our roles overlap, when is the right time to set up a product ops function, and how to ensure that everyone has time for that glue work. In the second episode, we will talk about how AI is changing the role of product managers and how product ops can help leverage this technology. We will also discuss the different types of complexities to manage, including the biggest ones, managing change with human beings. So if you're tired of doing the ops work yourself because you don't have such dedicated team, or if you dislike your product ops team who keeps on giving you processes to follow, these 2 episodes are here to reconcile you with product ops and giving you the hints to move forward and be a better product organization.
Welcome to Product Perspectives, the podcast for product people that gives a voice to their stakeholders, hosted by Magali Pellissier. Each weekly episode shows you the other side of the product with interviews of the people who contribute to making products a success. They are engineers, writers, marketers, support analysts, UX designers, or even salespeople. Not only will they get the credit they deserve, but they will share their perspectives on what makes a good product and product manager. Stakeholder management is a key skill for product managers. So just as you're obsessed with listening to your customers, let's hear from your stakeholders.
Thank you so much, Julie, for taking the time to join me today, because we met at a conference last year and I was so interested in your discussion about product operation that I invited you straight away in the podcast. And what I think is a good start for the conversation is, about your journey. How did you get into product operations?
Thank you, Magali, and thank you so much for having me. I'm super excited to share a little bit more about product operations. So I fell into product operation a little bit by chance. So during the past 13 years, I had like a few different hats. And among them, like a couple of times, I had like a project program management role where already I was dealing with project and stakeholder management. And then when I had the opportunity to be the first PM of a team, then part of my role was already to set some foundations for the team to then grow up to 4 PM. So we're talking about ritual setting, like the onboarding, documentation, and everything. Then when I joined PayFit a year and a half ago, then my role was a little bit different, but I had already like a good part of operation in it. My role was to facilitate some collaboration, feedback management, and then since last March, it's now my full-time role.
Great. So you've mentioned several times the term product operations. I guess the first question for me is, what do you mean by product operations? Because we know that depending on the company, it means different things.
Exactly right. Depending on the maturity of your product team, the whole company, then the product operation role might be different. So sometimes it's only one person. Here at PayFit, I lead a team of 4. So already we have a lot more bandwidth and bandwidth to manage more topics. So I think for us, first to start with, the way we define our role is to orchestrate the product and tech department so that we are able to maximize fulfillment, efficiency, and impact. So first, we work with both PMs and engineers at PayFit, which is not always the case for every product operations role. And then, having said that, we then define 4 main pillars that we would tackle: strategy, intelligence, enablement, and excellence. So strategy is like to make sure that the whole department is aligned with the company objective. So like it's translated into managing OKRs, road mapping, such processes. Intelligence is to make sure the PMs have access to the right insights. So think data, dashboard, customer feedback. Then enablement is to make sure that we are all able to deliver in the best condition. So here we are talking about tool governance, some AI that we'll touch on later, etc. And the last one is excellence. And in that pillar, we encompasses everything around best practices sharing, making sure that we are all growing as a community. So for example, we have, and we still have actually an agile coach. So we have all those 4 pillars. They are not always activated at the same weight, but these are like how we then, like strings we can pull to make the whole department more efficient.
Yeah, thank you. So I see 2 things. One is the fact that you're not just helping product teams, you're also helping the tech side, the engineers. So I think that's a differentiator compared to some other product operations function. On the other hand, the pillar view, I've had several people working in product operations in the podcast, and they always refer to some pillars, which are, interestingly enough, always very different. There's always something around intelligence and gathering data, making it available, self-service. And there's always something about enablement. How do we help people perform in their role as well? But that's very interesting to see the similarities. So in your journey, you also worked at Google. And I noticed that because in your LinkedIn profile, I was like, it was written like Googler. I don't know how you actually pronounce it. I was like, what is that? And I was just like, oh, ex-Googler. I was like, oh, okay. So first, how do you pronounce it? How am I supposed to pronounce it? And then how did this role at Google shape your career?
Yeah. So Zooglers is actually a community led by former Googler who are entrepreneurs. So he gathered that whole community across like different countries. We organized a demo day in Paris a couple of years ago. So this is like the former Googlers, Startuppers Today community. And for sure, I think my role at Google shaped me in so many different ways. So when you shared the question, I was like, okay, what are like the main highlights? And I had 2 of them. The first one is OKRs, and to this day, I'm like a firm believer of that methodology. I think it's so much more than just tracking objectives. So I think it's very powerful. And so what I then carried on in my core job, even though now it's like I'm responsible for the OKR process in the company, is also that having that mindset of understanding the overarching goal of your company, of your team, and then see how you can fit and contribute to that that objective. It's really actually empowering, because then you are able to propose something that fits into the vision of the wider vision. So this is definitely something that I kept with me till this day. And second one is that's one of the program management role I was talking about. And I think at Google, they really are a big fan of like I forgot the expression, is like homemade. Like don't buy stuff. You just start with an Excel sheet, like a Google sheet actually, and run with it. And so it really teaches me to start small. I don't buy something on the shelf. I have to like see what is the minimum value I need to bring, do with my means, and then see like the value you can bring. And with that, always keeping a high level of excellence. So managing those two, I think, was very interesting and challenging you to find the best solution within the quickest time. I think is really something I took on with me.
Great. And I think that also links with the fact that you were a PM before and now you're in product ops, which has some overlaps with PM.
Yeah.
So I think it's a very good thing that you've got this background, because I wouldn't want, and we're going to touch on that, a product ops person telling me how to do my job if I've never done the job before, right? So how do you reflect on being a PM before product ops was even a thing?
Yes, I think it's first I want to really emphasize that you don't need to have been like a PM to be a good product operation person. I think it's good if within your team you have someone, right? So I'm actually the only one with PM experience in my team. All the 4 people I'm managing at the moment are project managers. And I think it brings a really good complementarity of like getting things done, but also speaking the language and understanding the day-to-day constraints of our users. And so before that, so I think the best example to illustrate that is when I was the first PM and then soon to be joined and having like a team of 4. I was not a lead PM. We were all 4 PMs. I think being the first, you need to set up some ground rules. You need to set up some foundation. So because I was here first, then I propose like rituals, stand-ups, retro. I set up the whole onboarding of the team for the developers who were joining the teams. Everything about documentation and making sure that our stakeholders were what to expect when, because also like product management and agility was a whole new thing in that company at that time. So I think documenting as much as I can, and those are actually ops things. And I did that in my day-to-day in my role, in addition to delivering my own product. It was a lot, and I think it's I think sometimes it's hard to get it recognized, and I call it a little bit like the invisible work. And so when you have a community of like a couple of PMs, obviously you will not have the budget. You have a full-time person dedicated on that. And do you need it? Maybe not. When you're like 4 PM, you don't need someone. But making sure that that job is like defined as something to be done and distributed and recognized was important. And I think now, today, it is the case, whether you have a product ops or not in your team. And I think then it makes the whole thing like a lot easier because that work is not invisible anymore.
Yeah, that's something we touched upon, which is the fact that very often when there is invisible work like this, it's picked up by minorities. And then if it's not rewarded, then they don't look like they're doing as much work as the other ones, and they're not as successful. Maybe they don't achieve their target. They can't launch this like fancy new thing. So it's really good that we talk about rewarding that work, whether there is a team dedicated to that, like product ops, or not.
Yeah.
The other thing around how we perceive product ops is sometimes we think about them as process people, and instead of being partners to product managers and really be helping us perform, they feel like, it's like coming from the top. It's a lot of pressure, deadlines, and all these things we don't like. So how do you think we can avoid this?
Yes, I think, and it's totally fair to have that first impression, because it's like, someone who's not in your day-to-day, like giving you advice on your job is like I have thought about it. Thank you very much, obviously. So I think for us, it's like 2 very big steps. First is building trust and listening. We spend a lot of time with PMs and engineers. At the beginning of the year, we had a whole initiative around shadowing, not only for us, but like for all PMs. And we shadowed quite a few teams and making sure that we understand like where they are at the moment. So that was very important, like the open door policy. If something like you disagree with, you don't understand, please come to us. Like we are like a very friendly team. So yeah, building trust as much as we can. And the second is like start with the why. Whether it's something that's coming up from leadership or like another team, is like it has to come up with context. And us as product ops, we have to remember you are on your day-to-day, you don't have the context. We can't assume that you know everything about what we are dealing with. So yeah, starting with the why and making sure that you understand like what's in it for you is very important. And so for that, we established a couple of rules. So one is we need a sponsor, and second, we need a core team. And so when the sponsor is here to help us really define and how do you say, like define and make the why very, very simple and very straightforward. And the core team is making sure that we are building the right solution. And maybe one last thing I want to add on that. I wanted to talk about a little bit on like enablers versus enforcers. And I think this is something that sometimes can make product ops people feel a little bit like coming from a top-down perspective, is if we're here to do the police of Jira, the police of product boards, the police of Notion. And like, we are like struggling, like if the tool is not used, the tool won't be useful. If nothing is in product boards, your roadmap will be useless, that we know. But we have to come from a posture of enablers. We are here to build tools and make sure that you have everything to use it. But for us, more and more, I'm trying to move away from the adoption metric and say like, our success is not defined by who's using it, but like, is it useful at the end? If no one is using it, although they tried, but in the end, if it's not useful, let's kill it and find something else. So I really try to keep in mind every time that we are enablers and not enforcers.
Yeah, I like that view actually. And I can definitely relate with some experience I've got of, like something is pushed onto me and I've got to do it. I think I've experienced times as well when I felt that the process that was in place would enable me to do my job better, but it still takes time. So I think it takes time at the beginning to get used to that, learning a new tool or just learning about the process, investing time in training. And then it still takes time just documenting, for example, as a product manager, rather than having everything in my head or in documents all over the place. So what we're saying is, even if there is a product ops team, that doesn't mean that the PMs have no operation work to do. They still have to do that. So how do you think this is recognized, first of all? And how can we give PMs this time to contribute to operations?
Yes, actually, I really love that, because sometimes also like I'm a defender of product ops, but I agree. It doesn't mean that you guys as PM don't have that invisible work to still be doing in your day-to-day. So I 100% agree with that. And so for that, I think like I'm thinking of a friend of mine who's working in a similar French scale-up situation, but he's the only product ops. And beforehand, he was a PM. And the way they started product ops, like a couple of years ago, was a community of PMs. And so they were all volunteering to give that time for operations. And I think even if you have full-time people, you still have that community. And I think first, that community needs to be volunteering. but it has to be communicated and like highlighted in perf reviews and career path. So when we look at like how to make that work valued is when you do the perf review, something was expected of you and you delivered. That's the only way that it's going to be valued, right? And I think then it's important to write that down in the career path. So like past a certain level of seniority as PM, you are expected to shine beyond your scribe, right? And I think operation is the best way to do that. Sharing your best practices, sharing your experience with less experienced product like PMs is ops, right? And this needs to be valued in your perf review, in your career path. That's the only way where people can actually spend time, grow from it, and then it's sustainable.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. A lot of companies have career frameworks where it's a grid and like almost like a matrix, and it's almost as if product ops should be one of those lines. And as you grow more senior, you contribute more towards improving the processes and the ways of working of the product practices. It got me thinking as well around the way we recognize individuals, and sometimes it can be very achievement driven, but we also tend to forget the way people behave. Are they easy to work with? Are they ready to help? And that's also something that is probably another line as well on how you behave in the company and help the whole company, not just yourself, perform. And that's something that can be ignored as well.
Exactly.
So when we're talking about measuring and making sure that that we take into account all these other things that people do that contribute to make the organization work, it gets me thinking as well about engineering, because we could be tempted to count the number of story points or to count the number of lines of code. And what's very interesting, as you said earlier, is that PayFit, you also work with the tech side. And you don't have an engineering background. So you have a PM background, and you told us that it helps to have someone like this in a product ops team, but you don't have an engineering background. So in that case, I wonder, how do you establish the legitimacy with engineers?
Yeah, that's a very good question, because when I was saying that, oh, having a PM is very useful in a props team, and then I'm like, but we don't have an engineer. So yes, then I think it's like it's going back to making sure that what you bring to the table is like highlighted and what you won't do is clear. And so we see our engineers as subject matter experts. We are not in their shoes. We don't work with the same tools. We don't have the same constraint. And making sure that they know we know is like a very good start to the conversation. As you said, we are a partner. So our skill set, what we bring to the table, is project and stakeholder management. Everything around understanding how to measure like developer performance, or like what governance we should implement into Datadog, for example. We work as partners. So we have a co-lead on the engineering side that makes sure that the solution we build, the content is good, and we are making sure that the project is moving forward. And so that's like the first part. The second is like same as PM, is like shadowing and active listening. I think understand, like speaking the same language, or at least try, is always a good way to build rapport with them, and making sure that slowly we do understand what are the main pain points. And I think this is the most important when making sure that we are not only leading top-down initiative, is to make sure that at some point we are also able to propose solutions for them, or at least highlight problems and find a solution together. And I think it's interesting that you were speaking about metrics and like metrics on engineering side, because this is a big deal at the moment at PayFit. And we had that McKinsey article and the response on the engineering side. And for us, it was very, very important to listen to what they had to say, because like it's like no one wants to build something that no one will use. Like us first, like we don't want to build a dashboard that everyone looks at and say, this is not useful for me, it's only tracking for leadership. That's not, like, if it's not used by the team, no, like there's no data, no insight in those dashboards. So for us, it was very important to like take that time, talk with them, go over those articles together. I had a couple of actually meetups with architects and software engineers, like not shouting at me. They were very friendly, but making sure that I was not counting lines of code. And so for that, we have a developer experience team on the engineering. They are our partner, making sure that we understand what DORA metrics are, that those are like part of the dashboard. So this is a good example of, okay, a problem was highlighted by leadership. We have to tackle it. The solution has to come like from bottom up.
Good. Yes, that McKinsey article was very good, and I'm sure that it has triggered a lot of conversations, especially if this is something that is a hot topic in your company at the moment. So, okay, so you've talked about actually something that is a problem highlighted by the leadership, and saying, well, let's look at the problem and let's talk to stakeholders, which, by the way, is a product approach as well. Nobody wants to build something that is not going to be used. It really resonates with me as a PM, right? But I'm sure there are lots of things to deal with, just like in product, and this is where it leads to priorities. So what are the priorities that you're focusing on? Like, what does Product Ops help drive?
So our priorities have changed as like the company grew and like the strategy shifted. So since like a year ago, actually, with the big like tech big bang, where like all scale up had to readjust their strategy from hypergrowth to scalability. And so it does mean for product ops, we went to then a little bit more like efficiency focused in our priorities. So for the last semester, it's translated into three main priorities. First was increase reliability and productivity. So like we talked about like metrics, velocity, and etc. Second one was internal alignment. So this is both within the department, talking about dependencies, etc., but also with other customer-facing departments, so customer service, marketing, sales. So everything around like alignments on company objective. And the last one was a little bit our moonshot, is AI for productivity. So we are spending time testing like what AI could help us do and be more efficient.
We're going to touch on AI a bit later, but I just want to almost categorize what you said into two, because you've mentioned that word before to me, inward work and outward work. So how do you define these? And can you give me some examples of how product ops help?
Yes. So those would be those first two objectives. Inward is, okay, we are looking at ourselves with the squad, so both product and engineers. We also have designer, but we have designer ops, a team that is already focusing on their need. So for me, it's really looking at squad as PMs and developers. And okay, saying our objective is to altogether be more efficient. How do we raise the bar in terms of excellence, and collectively how we can grow together, sharing best practices? So this is it translated into different initiatives across the year. But for example, we had the investor minute where PMs during our PM community weekly, we're sharing for 5 minutes how they would use the INVEST framework on their user stories. So each on like a specific angle. So that would be one way, providing metrics on the Jira and say, okay, we are building those dashboards to highlight, okay, how much time do you spend on maintenance, managing tech debt, actually feature launching, to have like, just to have the information and then for them to be able to act on it. So this is like looking inward. And then looking outward is, okay, we are working with customer service, marketing, product marketing, sales. How do we share information, making sure that everyone is on the same page, they all have the top line priorities for product, so they're able to then share insight, valuable and actionable insight on their hands. So for example, that CS is able to like share like the risk of churn, like what, like according to the top segments, what are the highlights that we then product should include in our roadmap. And so facilitating all those collaborations.
Great, thank you. And one last question before we move to AI. It's actually a question from one of the PMs you work with, so Pierre Mertens. And let's hear the question.
How do you create your own roadmap first? And second, which indicator are you following on long-term and also on daily basis?
I really enjoy working with Pierre because he's always, he has high expectations for us. So it does mean that he's really challenging us on a day-to-day, and this is the only way we can improve. So like, I know Pierre, you had lots of questions, so let's tackle this one first. So yes, we have a quarterly roadmap. And as PMs, what we do is like on like a continuous basis, we are building up our backlog, and we have several steps. So first one in that backlog, we try to use the ICE framework. So impact, confidence. Confidence is dependencies on like the bandwidth of the PMs, for example, and effort on our side. So this is giving us like a rough prioritization, but then what is very important for us is to balance our initiative with audiences. So we never want to have more than two main change management initiatives at once for one audience. Audiences being product builders, product managers, and engineers. Because if you want to change everything on their ways of working, you will not know what works and what improved, what had an impact anyway. So we try to then filter a little bit out like with these, and also have a good balance of, okay, this was maybe an idea from leadership and this was an idea from the teams, and have a good balance of like top down, bottom up initiatives. And once you have that proposal, is then go to the directors and see like both product and engineers, and see if they want to swap out something, and see like if they are all on board with that roadmap. So that's like our road mapping. And I knew Pierre was going to ask me about indicators, because as product ops, we are always talking about PMs. You need to be data driven. So why won't we product like data driven as well? So this is, to be honest, very challenging. On a longer term, we do use OKRs as well. So here we have three ways of three objectives. One is to be enablers, and here we are measuring like, did we give access and support on new tools or processes? So very manual way to gather that data. So that is going to be referring to, for example, our current objective of being more efficient. Second objective was to foster better internal alignment. And here is like, okay, was info shared on time? And any conversation happened afterwards. So conversation could be oh, you know about that dependency we didn't talk about during the meeting. Yeah, actually, it will impact the roadmap. All those conversations, every time it happens, it means we failed as product ops. And the last one I tried was to gather metrics around satisfaction of the whole community. The whole community at the moment is 250 people. And I had never a worst response rate to a survey ever. So maybe that was not the best way to measure engagement, but I think I'll have to find another way, but I feel it's important to gauge if the PM feels like we are tackling the right challenges at all times. So I'll find another way, but yeah, survey was not the solution here.
I like it. I like in the first part of what you said, the experimentation aspect, where you said, well, we're only changing one thing at a time for an audience because we need to be able to see if it worked or not. And if we're changing everything at once, then there would be a lot of noise. And one comment for Pierre, you work in the same company. You can just ask those questions anytime.
Oh, he does. Don't worry, he does.
Thank you everyone for taking the time to listen to this podcast. If you enjoyed this episode, please share it with your friends and colleagues, and rate it on your favorite podcast platform. If you have suggestions for topics and guests, or any feedback, you can write to Magali Pellissier at hotmail.fr.